Don't bother, we're moving out. Your house is already sold. Bye. My daughter texted me. I replied, okay, but you forgot something. Then she answered, what are you talking about? I smiled because the house she sold. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I was folding laundry in my small apartment when my phone buzzed. The sound made my heart skip a little the way it always did when I thought it might be Ka. At 66, I still held on to that foolish hope that my daughter would call just to chat. Maybe ask how I was doing or share something about her day. The message was brief, cold, and brutal in its simplicity. Don't bother us anymore. We're moving. Your house has been sold. Bye. I read it 3 times, my hands trembling as I gripped the phone. Your house as if it had never really been mine to begin with, as if the 30 years I'd lived there, raised her there, meant nothing. My legs gave out and I sank onto my worn couch, still staring at those harsh words on the screen. The casual cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. Not even a phone call, not even the courtesy of a conversation, just a text message dismissing me like I was some persistent salesperson. I tried calling her immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. Of course it did. Ka had probably blocked my number right after sending that message. The thought made my chest tighten with a pain I hadn't felt since her father left us 20 years ago. We're moving. Who was we? Ka, her husband Derek, and their 2 kids, I assumed. The family I'd helped raise. The grandchildren I'd babysat countless times, fed, loved, and cared for as if they were my own. Apparently, none of that mattered anymore. I typed back with shaking fingers. Okay, but you forgot something. The response came faster than I expected. What are you talking about? I could practically hear the irritation in her voice through the screen. That tone she'd developed over the past few years, the one that made me feel like I was bothering her simply by existing. I set the phone down and walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the small courtyard below where Mrs. Chen from apartment 3B was tending her flowers. How had it come to this? When did I become such a burden to the daughter I'd given everything for? The memories flooded back sharp and painful. Ka, at 5 years old, crying because she'd scraped her knee, and only mommy's kisses could make it better. Ka, at 16, storming out of the house after an argument only to sneak back in through her bedroom window hours later, finding me still awake, waiting to make sure she was safe. Those days felt like they belonged to someone else's life now. I picked up my phone again and scrolled through our recent conversations. They were pathetic, really. Me asking if she needed anything from the store when I knew she was coming by. Her responding with one-word answers, or not at all. Me sending photos of things I thought might interest her. A beautiful sunset. A newspaper article about her old school. Her silence in return. When had I become so desperate for her attention? When had I started walking on eggshells in my own daughter's presence? The house. God. The house. The 3-bedroom colonial on Maple Street where I'd brought her home as a newborn, where she'd taken her first steps lost. Her first tooth had her first heartbreak where I'd worked double shifts as a nurse just to keep up with the mortgage payments after Richard left. I remembered the day 2 years ago when Ka suggested I move out. Mom, you're rattling around in that big house all by yourself. She'd said, her voice honey, but her eyes calculating. Wouldn't you be happier in a nice apartment? Less to maintain, more freedom. Derek had nodded along, throwing around words like equity and market value and smart financial planning. They'd made it sound like they were doing me a favor, like moving into this cramped 1-bedroom was some kind of gift. We'll take care of everything, Ka had promised. The paperwork, the repairs, finding buyers. You just focus on finding your perfect little place. Perfect little place. I looked around my apartment, 400 square feet of beige walls and thin carpeting where the neighbor's television was so loud I knew their viewing schedule by heart. This wasn't perfect. This was exile. But I'd agreed because I trusted her. Because she was my daughter, and daughters don't betray their mothers. Because I thought she had my best interests at heart. How naive I'd been. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Ka. Mom, answer me. What did we forget? I could picture her now, probably pacing around the kitchen of the house that used to be mine. That beautiful kitchen with the bay window where I'd spent countless mornings drinking coffee and watching the sunrise. She'd be frustrated, maybe a little worried that I knew something she didn't. And she was right to be worried. I smiled for the first time in hours, a small, bitter smile that felt foreign on my face because there was something they'd forgotten. Something important. Something that would change everything. 23 years ago, when Richard walked out on us, leaving me with a mortgage I could barely afford and a 12-year-old daughter to raise alone, I'd made a decision. A smart decision, as it turned out, though I'd never expected to need it. I'd never told Ka about the trust. Why would I? She was just a child then, and later, when she was older, it never seemed relevant. The house was her home, her inheritance. I always assumed we'd handle things properly when the time came, with lawyers and proper documentation and family discussions. I never imagined she'd simply decide to sell it without me. The trust documents were in my safety deposit box, along with my will, some old jewelry, and the deed that showed the house had never actually been transferred into Ka's name. Legally, technically, it was still mine. The trust I'd established protected it, ensured it would pass to her eventually, but only under specific conditions. Conditions she'd just violated. My phone rang. Ka's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. Mom, call me back right now. This isn't funny. What are you talking about? The panic in her voice was unmistakable. For the first time in years, she needed something from me. For the first time in years, I held the power. I wasn't ready to use it yet. First, I needed to understand exactly what she'd done, who she'd sold the house to, for how much, and how far along the process had gone. Then I'd decide what to do next. But one thing was certain. I wouldn't be dismissed with a cruel text message like some unwanted stranger. Not anymore. I didn't call Kaya back that night. Instead, I sat in my small living room, surrounded by the few possessions I'd been allowed to take from the house, and let myself remember. Really remember. Not the sanitized version I usually told myself to make the pain bearable. It started with Richard leaving. I can still see him standing in our bedroom doorway, suitcase in hand, telling me he'd found someone else. Someone younger, he said, as if my 36 years made me ancient, someone who understood him better. Someone who didn't work night shifts at the hospital and come home smelling like antiseptic and exhaustion. What about Ka? I'd asked, my voice barely a whisper. He'd shrugged. Actually shrugged like our 12-year-old daughter was some minor inconvenience he'd forgotten about. She's better off with you. Kids need their mothers. That was the last time we talked about custody. He moved to Phoenix with his 24-year-old secretary and sent a check for $300 every few months until Ka turned 18. Then even those stopped. I remember sitting Kaya down the morning after he left, trying to find words that would make sense to a child who'd just lost half her world. Daddy had to go away for work. I'd said the lie, tasting bitter in my mouth. But we're going to be just fine. You and me against the world, sweetheart. She'd nodded, those big green eyes, Richard's eyes, trusting me completely. When is he coming back? I never did answer that question directly. I just held her tight and promised I'd never leave her. A promise I kept even when it nearly destroyed me. The mortgage on the house was $1,500 a month. My salary as a registered nurse at Mercy General covered it barely, but there was nothing left over. No money for dance lessons, or new clothes, or the brand name sneakers all her friends wore. I picked up extra shifts whenever I could, working doubles and weekends until I was so tired I could barely see straight. Khan never complained. Not then. She was such a good kid, so understanding when I had to work late, so helpful around the house. She'd make herself peanut butter sandwiches for dinner when I couldn't get home in time to cook. She'd walk to school when I couldn't drive her. She never asked for much, maybe because she could see how hard I was already working. But I wanted to give her everything. Every mother does. When she was 15, she mentioned wanting to take AP biology, but the school required students to have their own microscope, $250 I didn't have. I worked an extra weekend shift at the hospital's emergency department. Came home with a black eye from a patient who'd been high on something nasty. But I bought that microscope. When she was 16 and wanted to go to prom, I spent my entire tax refund on her dress shoes, hair appointment, and a limo she shared with 3 friends. She looked like a princess, and seeing her smile made every hour of overtime worth it. When she was 17 and applying to colleges, I refinanced the house to pay application fees and help with her expenses. The guidance counselor said she had a good chance at scholarships, but we needed to cast a wide net. 37 applications at $75 each. I did the math in my head while signing the papers. That was nearly $3,000 more than I made in a month. But she got into state university with a partial scholarship. Not full like we'd hoped, but enough to make it possible. I took out a second mortgage to cover the rest. Those 4 years nearly broke me. Between her tuition room and board books and spending money, I was sending her over $20,000 a year. I ate ramen noodles for dinner most nights and wore scrubs so old they were more gray than blue. I drove a car that broke down twice a month and kept heat at 62 degrees all winter. But when Ka graduated magna cum laude with her degree in marketing, when she walked across that stage and smiled at me in the audience, it felt worth it. She was everything I'd dreamed she could be. Smart, successful, beautiful, confident, everything I'd sacrificed for. She got a job at an advertising firm right after graduation. Good salary, benefits, a future. She moved into an apartment downtown, started dating Derek, a junior partner at a law firm. They seemed happy, and I was so proud of the woman she'd become. That's when things started to change. It was subtle at first. Phone calls became shorter and less frequent. She was busy with work with Derek with her new life. I understood. I'd raised her to be independent after all. But then came the little comments. How the house was too big for just me. How I was wasting money on utilities and maintenance. How I should think about downsizing now that I was getting older and might need help with upkeep. I was 58 when she first brought it up. 58, not 98. Still working full-time, still perfectly capable of managing my own life. Mom, Derek knows this great real estate agent, she'd said over dinner at the house one Sunday. She could give you an estimate on what this place is worth. The market is really hot right now. I'd brushed it off then, thinking she was just making conversation, but she kept bringing it up. Every visit, every phone call. Have you thought any more about selling? You could buy something so much nicer with all that equity. The pressure intensified after she married Derek 3 years ago. Suddenly, every conversation included references to my situation, as if living in my own home was some kind of problem that needed solving. Mom, you're rattling around in this big house all by yourself, became her favorite refrain. Wouldn't you be happier somewhere smaller, more manageable? When their first baby was born, she started talking about family planning and consolidating resources and how much easier it would be if we simplified things. I should have seen it coming. I should have recognized the manipulation, the way she was slowly, methodically convincing me that staying in my home was somehow selfish or impractical. But I trusted her. She was my daughter, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, the woman I'd raised to be honest and caring and good. So when she suggested I move into this apartment, I agreed. Just temporarily, she'd said, while we get the house market ready and find you something perfect. Market ready had involved $23,000 in renovations. New kitchen cabinets, hardwood floors, updated bathrooms, fresh paint throughout. These improvements will increase the value significantly, Derek had explained. It's an investment in Mom's future. Except they hadn't asked me to contribute to those improvements. And they hadn't involved me in selecting contractors or choosing materials or overseeing the work. I'd been relegated to waiting in my temporary apartment while they transformed my home into something unrecognizable. When I'd asked to see the renovation plans, Ka had waved me off. Don't worry about it, Mom. We've got everything handled. Just focus on getting settled in your new place. My new place, this cramped apartment that smelled like other people's cooking and where the walls were so thin. I could hear every argument the couple next door had about money and kids and whose turn it was to take out the trash. I'd been here 2 years now. 2 years of the market isn't quite right yet, and we want to make sure you get top dollar and just a few more little improvements. 2 years of being excluded from decisions about my own property. 2 years of feeling like a burden every time I called or visited, and now this text message telling me the house had been sold without my knowledge, without my consent, without even the courtesy of a conversation. I pulled out a photo album I kept on my coffee table filled with pictures of Ka growing up. There she was at her high school graduation, beaming as she held her diploma at her college graduation, throwing her cap in the air. At her wedding, dancing with Derek while I watched from a corner table where I'd been seated with the elderly relatives. In every photo, I could see my love for her, my pride, my hope for her future. But looking at them now, I noticed something else. In the later photos, she was barely looking at me. Even when we were standing next to each other, her attention was always somewhere else. On Derek, on the camera, on anyone but the mother who'd given up everything to make her dreams possible. When had I become invisible to my own daughter? When had I stopped mattering? My phone buzzed again. Another text from Ka. Mom, I'm getting worried. Call me back. We need to talk. Finally, she wanted to talk. After dismissing me with a cruel text after selling my house behind my back after treating me like an inconvenience for 2 years, now she was worried. I turned off my phone and went to bed. Let her worry. Let her wonder what I might do. Tomorrow I'd start making some calls of my own. I woke up to 17 missed calls and 12 text messages from Ka. Each message grew more frantic than the last, starting with, Mom, please call me back, and escalating to, I'm coming over if I don't hear from you in the next hour. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at my small kitchen table, finally turning my phone back on. The messages had continued through the night, and I could practically feel her desperation through the screen. The last message, sent at 6:30 this morning, simply said, Mom, I'm scared. What did we forget? Good. Let her be scared. Let her feel even a fraction of the terror I'd felt yesterday when I thought I'd lost everything. Instead of calling her back, I got dressed and drove to First National Bank, where I'd maintained the same safety deposit box for 24 years. The bank manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, had known me since Ka was a teenager. She remembered when I'd first opened the box right after Richard left. How are you doing, Leona? She asked as she led me to the vault. And how's Ka? I heard she got married a few years back. She did, I replied, following her through the familiar process of accessing my box. She's doing very well for herself. If only she knew how well. Inside the metal box were the documents I'd hoped I'd never need. The trust agreement I'd established in 1999 when Ka was just 13, and I was terrified that something might happen to me. The original deed to the house still in my name. The insurance policies, the will that clearly outlined how my assets should be distributed. But most importantly, there was the addendum I'd added to the trust 5 years later, after Richard stopped sending his pathetic child support payments altogether. An addendum that protected the house from being sold or transferred without specific conditions being met. Conditions that required my daughter to maintain a relationship with me, to treat me with respect, to include me in any major decisions regarding the property. Conditions she just spectacularly failed to meet. I took photographs of every relevant document with my phone, then carefully returned everything to the box. Mrs. Rodriguez walked me back to the lobby, chatting pleasantly about her own grandchildren, oblivious to the storm brewing in my chest. Next, I drove to the courthouse. Public records were exactly that, public. It took me less than an hour to discover that Kaya and Derek had indeed found a buyer for my house. The Hendersons, a young couple with 2 small children, had agreed to pay $450,000 for the property, for the $450,000. I sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot, staring at the sales agreement on my phone screen. The house I'd bought for $98,000, 30 years ago, the house I'd nearly killed myself working to keep, was now worth almost $500,000, and Ka had planned to keep every penny. The sale was scheduled to close in 10 days. The Hendersons had already been approved for their mortgage, had completed their home. Inspection had probably already started packing their current home in anticipation of the move. I felt sorry for them. They were innocent in all this. Just a young family looking for a place to raise their children. They had no idea they were trying to buy a house that wasn't actually for sale. My phone rang. Ka again. This time I answered. Mom? Thank God. Where have you been? I've been calling you all night. Her voice was strained, higher pitched than usual. I could hear Derek in the background asking if she'd reached me. I've been busy, I said calmly, taking care of some business matters. Mom, what did you mean yesterday when you said we forgot something? What are you talking about? I paused, letting the silence stretch between us. Let her sweat a little longer. Ka, tell me about the sale of the house. What about it? We found a great buyer. The price is excellent. The closing is next week. We're handling everything just like we promised. And where exactly do I fit into this transaction? Another pause. I could practically hear her brain working, trying to figure out what I knew. Mom, you don't need to worry about any of the details. Derek has handled all the legal stuff. The proceeds will go into an account for you. Of course, we're thinking about setting up something nice for your retirement. Maybe a CD or an annuity. Of course, they'd plan to give me an allowance from the sale of my own house. How generous of them. Ka, whose name is on the deed. Well, we've been living there and maintaining it, and you moved out, so obviously. Whose name is on the deed? I repeated, my voice sharper now. Mom, this is silly. We can talk about all this later. The important thing is that everything is taken care of. That's when I knew for certain that she had no idea. She'd never actually looked at the deed. She'd simply assumed that because I'd moved out, because I'd let them handle the renovations and the marketing, because I'd been so passive and compliant for 2 years, that the house was somehow legally theirs. Ka, I need you to come over here now. We need to talk. I can't right now. Derek has a client meeting and the kids have soccer practice. And now Ka or I call the real estate agent and stop this sale. The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, she spoke and her voice was completely different. Cold, calculating. You can't stop the sale, Mom. The contracts are signed. We have buyers. Everything is legal. Are you so sure about that? I hung up without waiting for her answer. 20 minutes later, she was pounding on my apartment door. I let her wait a full minute before opening it. And when I did, I barely recognized the woman standing in my hallway. This wasn't the daughter I'd raised, the sweet girl who used to curl up next to me on the couch to watch movies. This was someone else entirely, someone with fury in her eyes and tension in every line of her body. What the hell is going on? She demanded, pushing past me into my living room. Derek stood behind her, looking uncomfortable but trying to project confidence. He'd always been handsome in a generic sort of way with his perfectly styled hair and expensive suits. But today, there was something predatory about him that I'd never noticed before. Mom, you're scaring us, Ka said, though she didn't look scared. She looked angry. What's all this nonsense about stopping the sale? I picked up my phone and showed them the photograph I'd taken of the deed that morning. This nonsense, Derek stepped forward, squinting at the screen. I watched his face change as he processed what he was seeing. The color drained from his cheeks, and he sank into my recliner without being invited. That's impossible, Kaya whispered. You moved out. You gave us permission to sell. We've been making all the payments and improvements. I moved out of my house, I said evenly. I never transferred ownership. The house is still mine, Ka. It's always been mine. But you said she trailed off, and I could see her trying to remember our conversations, looking for the moment when I'd actually signed anything over to them. There was no such moment, of course. They'd simply assumed. Derek found his voice first. Mrs. Patterson, I think there's been a misunderstanding. When Ka asked us to handle the sale, we naturally assumed all the paperwork was in order. Did you? Or did you just not bother to check because you figured the old lady wouldn't know any better? He had the grace to look ashamed. But Ka wasn't backing down. Fine, she said, crossing her arms. So the paperwork isn't perfect. We can fix that. You can sign whatever needs to be signed, and we'll proceed with the sale. I looked at my daughter. Really looked at her, at the designer handbag she carried, at the expensive highlights in her hair, at the diamond earrings that probably cost more than I made in a month. All paid for with money from a house that wasn't hers to sell. No, I said simply. What do you mean, no? I mean, I'm not signing anything. The house isn't for sale. Ka's composure finally cracked. You can't do this. We have contracts, we have buyers. We've already spent money on improvements. Improvements I didn't ask for to a house that wasn't yours to improve. Derek stood up, trying to regain control of the situation. Mrs. Patterson, let's all calm down and think about this rationally. The sale benefits everyone. You get a significant return on your investment. We recover the costs we've put into the property, and a nice family gets a beautiful home. And what if I don't want to sell? Why wouldn't you? Ka demanded. You're living here now. You don't need that big house anymore. The money would set you up for life. I walked to my kitchen window, looking out at Mrs. Chen's flowers again. She was out there this morning, too, carefully tending to her small garden with the kind of patience and love that only comes from knowing something truly belongs to you. Maybe I want to move back in, I said without turning around. The silence behind me was so complete I could hear the clock ticking on my wall. Finally, Ka spoke, and her voice was barely controlled fury. You can't be serious. I turned back to face them, and for the first time in 2 years I felt completely calm. I'm very serious. In fact, I think it's exactly what I want to do. The words hung in the air like a challenge. I could see Kaya and Derek exchanging glances, trying to figure out if I was bluffing, if this was just some kind of emotional outburst they could manage and contain. Mom, be reasonable, Kaya said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd heard so often lately. You can't just move back into the house. We've put too much work into this sale to stop now. Work? I repeated, tasting the irony. You mean the work of spending my equity without asking my permission? Derek cleared his throat, shifting into what I recognized as his lawyer mode. Mrs. Patterson, I understand you're upset, but we need to consider the legal implications here. We have binding contracts with the buyers. If we default on this sale, there could be significant financial penalties. I walked to my small bookshelf and pulled out a folder I'd been keeping there for months. Inside were all the documents Derek had asked me to sign over the past 2 years. Power of attorney forms for handling the sale details, authorization for renovations, insurance policy updates. I'd signed none of them. Derek showed me one piece of paper that gives you the legal right to sell my house. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I watched understanding dawn on his face. He was a lawyer. He knew exactly what this meant. The contracts you signed with the buyers are worthless. I continued, you can't sell something you don't own. The Hendersons could sue you for fraud if they wanted to. Kaya stood up abruptly, her hands clenched at her sides. This is insane. You're being completely irrational. Let me tell you what's irrational? Ka, what's irrational is spending over $20,000 renovating someone else's house without their permission. What's irrational is signing sales contracts for property you don't own. What's irrational is sending your mother a text message telling her to stop bothering you after she's given you everything she had for 30 years. My voice was rising, and I didn't care. The anger I'd been swallowing for months, maybe years, was finally finding its way out. I worked myself half to death to keep that house after your father left. I ate cereal for dinner so you could have dance lessons. I wore clothes from the thrift store so you could go to college. I refinanced my home twice to pay for your education, your wedding, your down payment on that fancy car you drive. Ka's face was pale now, but she wasn't backing down. Nobody asked you to do those things. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at my daughter, this woman I'd raised, this person I'd sacrificed everything for. and I finally saw her clearly for the first time. She wasn't grateful. She wasn't sorry. She felt entitled to everything I'd given her. And now she felt entitled to everything I still had. "You're right," I said quietly. "Nobody asked me. I was just a fool who thought being a mother meant putting your child first even when it cost me everything." Derek stood up, probably sensing that this conversation was spiraling beyond his ability to control. "Maybe we should all take some time to cool off. Think about this logically." "I've had plenty of time to think," I said. 2 years in this apartment. Listening to your promises about finding me something perfect. Watching you transform my home into an investment property. I pulled out my phone and showed them the photographs I'd taken at the bank. "But here's what you didn't think about. This trust agreement I established 24 years ago. It protects the house from being sold unless certain conditions are met." Derek moved closer to look at the screen, his face grave. As a lawyer, he understood immediately what he was seeing. "What conditions?" Kaya asked, though her voice had lost most of its bravado. I scrolled to the relevant clause and read it aloud. "The property may only be sold or transferred with the explicit written consent of the beneficiary, provided that the beneficiary has maintained a respectful and caring relationship with the grantor and has included the grantor in all major decisions regarding the property." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "You sent me a text message yesterday telling me not to bother you anymore," I continued. "You sold my house without consulting me. You've systematically excluded me from every decision about the property for 2 years. According to this trust, you violated every condition required for the sale." Kaya sank back into the couch, her face in her hands. "Mom, I'm sorry about the text. I was stressed about the move, and Derek was pressuring me to finalize everything." I looked at Derek, who had the grace to look ashamed. "Pressuring her how the firm has been having some financial difficulties," he admitted. "We need the commission from this sale to cover some debts." "Commission?" I felt something cold settle in my chest. "What commission?" Kaya looked up, tears in her eyes. But I wasn't feeling sympathetic anymore. Derek's been acting as our real estate agent. It made sense to keep the fees in the family. "How much? 6%, Derek mumbled. "Standard rate." I did the math in my head. 6% of $450,000 was $27,000. They weren't just planning to steal my house. They were planning to charge me a commission for the privilege. "Get out," I said. "Mom, please. Let's talk about this. Get out of my apartment, both of you." Ka started crying, but they were angry tears, not remorseful ones. "You're making a huge mistake. We were trying to help you by lying to me, by excluding me, by treating me like I was already dead." Derek took Kaya's arm, trying to guide her toward the door. "We should go. Let everyone calm down." But Ka wasn't finished. "Fine. Keep your precious house. Live there all alone like the bitter old woman you've become, but don't expect us to come running when you need help." The door slammed behind them, leaving me alone in the sudden silence. I waited for the crushing sadness to hit, for the grief of losing my daughter to overwhelm me. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Relief. I walked to my kitchen and made myself another cup of coffee, then sat at my table and picked up my phone. The first call was to Mrs. Henderson, the buyer's real estate agent. "Mrs. Henderson, this is Leona Patterson. I understand you have a contract to buy my house on Maple Street." "Yes, that's right, my house. I'm afraid there's been a serious error. The people who signed that contract don't actually own the property." The second call was to my own lawyer, Tom Brennan, who'd handled my trust documents years ago. He listened patiently as I explained the situation, occasionally asking for clarification. "Leona, I have to ask," he said finally. "What do you want to do here? Do you want to pursue fraud charges against your daughter and son-in-law?" I considered it. Derek had definitely committed fraud by signing contracts for property he didn't own. Ka had been complicit. They could face serious legal consequences. "No," I said after a moment. "I just want to move back into my house. That's completely within your rights." "But what about all the money they spent on renovations?" I thought about the $23,000 they'd invested in improvements I hadn't asked for, designed to increase the sale price of a house they had no right to sell. That's their problem, isn't it? Tom chuckled. I suppose it is. I'll draft a formal notice for them making it clear that any attempts to proceed with this sale will result in legal action. How soon do you want to move back in? I looked around my cramped apartment at the thin walls and the borrowed life I'd been living for 2 years. As soon as possible. The third call was the hardest. I dialed the Hendersons' number, which I'd found in the public records. Mrs. Henderson, this is Leona Patterson. I'm afraid I have some bad news about the house you're trying to buy. She was understandably upset, but also relieved to learn the truth before they'd wasted any more time or money on the transaction. She mentioned they'd already been looking at other properties, and I wished her family well in finding their perfect home. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen as the afternoon light faded, making a mental list of everything I'd need to do. Cancel my lease on this apartment. Hire a moving truck, change my address back to Maple Street, call the utility companies, and have everything switched back to my name, assuming Ka and Derek hadn't already done something to complicate that. Check what they'd done to the house during their renovations, what they might have damaged or changed without my knowledge. Figure out how to live in a place that had been transformed by people who'd never bothered to ask what I wanted. But for the first time in 2 years, these felt like good problems to have. They were problems that came from reclaiming my life, from refusing to be cast aside and forgotten. My phone rang again. Ka's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. This time, I was the one in control, and I intended to keep it that way. 3 days later, I stood in front of my house on Maple Street for the first time in 6 months. Ka and Derek had changed the locks, of course, but Tom had handled that with a locksmith and a copy of the deed. The house was legally mine, and I had every right to enter. What I found inside took my breath away. They hadn't just renovated, they'd completely transformed the place. The warm, honey-cold walls I'd painted myself were now stark white. The cozy living room where Kaya and I had spent countless evenings watching movies had been converted into some kind of showroom, with furniture that looked beautiful but felt cold and unwelcoming. My kitchen, the heart of our home where I'd taught Ka to bake cookies and helped her with homework at the breakfast table, was unrecognizable. Granite countertops had replaced my familiar Formica. Stainless steel appliances gleamed where my old white ones had served us faithfully for 15 years. Everything that had made this house a home was gone. I walked through each room cataloging the changes. They'd torn out the built-in bookshelves in the den where I'd kept my nursing journals and Ka's childhood photo albums. The master bedroom had been painted a trendy gray that made it feel like a hotel room. Even the bathroom had been gutted and rebuilt with expensive tile and fixtures that belonged in a magazine, not a family home. In what used to be Kaya's bedroom, I found boxes stacked against the walls. Her childhood things, I realized, the stuffed animals she'd collected, her high school yearbooks, the art projects I'd saved from elementary school. All of it packed away like garbage they hadn't gotten around to disposing of. My throat tightened as I opened one of the boxes. There was the ceramic handprint she'd made me for Mother's Day when she was 7, painted bright purple with "I love you, Mommy," scrolled in childish letters across the palm. Below it was a photo album filled with pictures from her childhood birthday parties, Christmas mornings, school plays, where she'd starred as everything from a tree to a princess. Had she forgotten these moments? Had they meant so little to her that she could pack them away like clutter? My phone had been ringing constantly since I'd moved back in. Kaya called at least 6 times a day, sometimes crying, sometimes angry, always demanding that I stop this nonsense and proceed with the sale. Derek had called too, using his lawyer voice to try to intimidate me with talk of good faith negotiations and reasonable compromises. I ignored them all. On the 4th day, they showed up at my door. I was in the kitchen trying to figure out how to use the new coffee maker they'd installed when I heard the key turning in the lock. For a moment, I felt the old fear, the automatic assumption that I was in the wrong somehow. Then I remembered this was my house. They were the intruders now. "Mom," Kaya's voice called from the entryway. "Are you here?" I didn't answer. I wanted to see what they'd do, how they'd act when they thought I wasn't watching. This is so messed up. Derek's voice low and tense. We can't just let her destroy everything we've worked for. She's being completely irrational, Ka replied. Maybe we should talk to Dr. Martinez about having her evaluated. She's clearly not thinking straight. Dr. Martinez was my family physician. The fact that Kaya was discussing having me declared mentally incompetent sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just about money anymore. They were willing to destroy me completely to get what they wanted. Mom, I know you're here. Ka called her voice, taking on that fake sweet tone I'd learned to recognize. We brought coffee and those pastries you like from Mueller's bakery. I walked into the living room where they stood looking around at the changes they'd made with obvious pride. Ka was holding a white paper bag, and Derek had a cardboard tray with 3 coffee cups. There you are. Kaya smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. We thought we could sit down and have a civilized conversation about all this. In my living room, I said. In my house. Derek set the coffee on the granite counter that had replaced my familiar breakfast bar. Leona, we need to find a way to move forward that works for everyone. The way that works for me is you both leaving and never coming back without an invitation. Ka's mask slipped slightly. Mom, you're being ridiculous. We can't just walk away from everything we've invested here. Watch me make it easy for you, I said, pulling out my phone. Tom, it's Leona. Could you please explain to my daughter and her husband what trespassing means? I put the phone on speaker. Tom's voice filled the room, professional and calm. Good morning, Ka Derek. I've sent you both certified letters explaining that Mrs. Patterson is the sole legal owner of the property you're currently occupying without permission. Any future entry without her explicit consent constitutes criminal trespass. Derek's face flushed red. This is ridiculous. We've put over $20,000 into this house. Money you spent without the owner's permission, Tom replied smoothly. That doesn't give you any legal claim to the property. In fact, Mrs. Patterson would be within her rights to sue you for vandalism. Vandalism. I looked around at the sterile magazine-perfect rooms that bore no resemblance to the home I'd loved. The word fit perfectly. We were trying to help her. Ka's voice was rising toward hysteria. We were trying to maximize the value of her investment. By excluding her from every decision, by changing the locks, by signing sales contracts for property you don't own. Tom's voice remained maddeningly calm. I'm afraid the law doesn't see it that way. After he hung up, the silence in the room was deafening. I could see Kaya and Derek exchanging glances, trying to figure out their next move. Mom. Ka tried one more time. Please just listen to reason. We can still make this work. We can find you a beautiful condo, something modern and easy to maintain. You could travel, take cruises, enjoy your retirement. With what money? The money you were planning to steal from the sale of my house. We weren't going to steal anything. Derek snapped, finally losing his composure. We were going to set up an annuity for you. Make sure you were taken care of. How generous, and how much were you planning to set aside for this annuity? They looked at each other, and I could see the calculation in their eyes. They'd never actually planned to give me more than a fraction of the sale price. That would depend on various factors. Derek said carefully. I see. And these various factors wouldn't include the $27,000 commission you were planning to pay yourself, or the costs of all these renovations I didn't ask for. Kaya started crying again, but this time I felt nothing. No sympathy, no urge to comfort her, no maternal instinct to fix whatever was wrong. We needed that money, she sobbed. Derek's firm is in trouble. We have debts. The kids need the kids. Need parents who don't commit fraud, I interrupted. They need parents who don't lie and steal from their own family. We're still your family, Kaya cried. I looked at her, really looked at her, at the designer clothes and expensive jewelry, at the entitled expression that had become her default at the woman who'd been willing to have me declared mentally incompetent to get what she wanted. No, I said quietly. You're not. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Kay's face went white and Derek actually stepped backward as if I'd struck him. You don't mean that, Ka whispered. I mean every word. A family doesn't abandon each other. A family doesn't lie and steal and manipulate. A family doesn't send cruel text messages dismissing 30 years of love and sacrifice. I walked to the front door and opened it. Get out, both of you, and don't come back. Derek moved first, perhaps recognizing that they'd lost whatever leverage they thought they had. But Kaya stood frozen in my living room, staring at me as if she was seeing a stranger. Mom, you can't mean this. I'm your daughter. You were my daughter. Now you're just someone who tried to steal my house. She flinched as if I'd slapped her, but I felt no satisfaction in causing her pain, only a deep, profound exhaustion. Last chance, I said. Leave now or I call the police. Finally, she moved. She walked past me without another word, and Derek followed. I closed the door behind them and turned the deadbolt. Through the window, I watched them stand on my front lawn, arguing in hushed, angry voices. Derek was gesturing wildly, probably trying to convince Kaya that they still had options, still had ways to get what they wanted. But I knew something they didn't know yet. Something I discovered when Tom and I had reviewed the trust documents more carefully. The trust didn't just protect the house from unauthorized sale. It also included provisions for what would happen if the beneficiary violated the terms of the agreement. Ka had just forfeited her inheritance completely. When I died, the house would go to charity instead of to her. I hadn't told Tom to include that clause in the paperwork yet. Part of me was still hoping that somehow, someway, we could find our way back to each other. But watching her through the window now, seeing the calculation in her expression as she and Derek plotted their next move, I realized that hope was foolish. The daughter I'd raised was gone. The woman standing on my lawn was a stranger who happened to share my DNA, and it was time to accept that truth no matter how much it hurt. 6 months later, I was sitting in my garden on a warm October afternoon, reading a book I'd been meaning to get to for years. The garden was one of the first things I'd restored after moving back in. I'd ripped out the expensive, low-maintenance landscaping Kaya and Derek had installed, and replanted the tomatoes, herbs, and flowers that had always made this place feel like home. The house itself was slowly becoming mine again. I'd kept some of the practical improvements. The new plumbing and electrical work were genuinely needed, but I'd repainted the walls in colors that felt warm and welcoming. I'd replaced the cold granite countertops with butcher block, brought back my comfortable furniture from storage, and filled the rooms with photos and books, and all the things that make a house feel lived in. My phone rang and I glanced at the caller ID. Sarah Jenkins, my next-door neighbor who'd become a close friend over the past few months. Leona, are you busy this evening? She asked. Bill and I are grilling burgers and we'd love to have you join us. That sounds wonderful, I replied and meant it. Sarah and Bill had been quietly supportive through everything, never asking intrusive questions, but always making sure I knew I wasn't alone. After I hung up, I went inside to check my email. There was a message from Tom with the subject line, "Final paperwork completed." I opened it and read his brief note. Leona, the trust modification has been filed and recorded. As requested, the property will now pass to the Children's Hospital Foundation upon your death with a specific designation for their pediatric cancer wing. Ka has been formally removed as beneficiary. All documentation is complete. I closed my laptop, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. It was done. Ka would never be able to claim the house. And when I was gone, it would serve a purpose that mattered. The Children's Hospital had been an easy choice. I'd worked there as a volunteer during my nursing career, and I'd seen firsthand how much good they did for families in crisis. The money from the eventual sale of the house would help other children in ways Kaya had never needed help. I hadn't heard from her in over 2 months. The last contact had been a series of increasingly desperate text messages after she'd discovered that Derek's law firm had filed for bankruptcy, leaving them responsible for significant debts. She'd asked, No demanded that I reconsider the sale, claiming it was my responsibility as a mother to help them through this financial crisis. I'd blocked her number after that. Through mutual acquaintances, I'd heard they'd been forced to sell their expensive condo and move into a rental house across town. Derek had taken a job with another firm at a significant pay cut. Kaya had gone back to work full-time, placing the kids in after-school care she couldn't really afford. I felt sorry for my grandchildren who were innocent victims in all this, but I didn't feel sorry for their parents who were finally learning the consequences of their choices. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment my heart jumped. Was it Ka making another attempt to reconcile? Instead, I found a young woman on my doorstep, probably in her early 30s with dark hair and familiar green eyes. It took me a moment to place her. Mrs. Patterson, I'm Jennifer Morrison. I used to be Jennifer Campbell. I lived next door when I was little. Of course, Jenny Campbell, the shy little girl who used to play with Kaya in our backyard. Her family had moved away when she was about 10. Jenny, my goodness, look at you. Please come in. She followed me into the living room, looking around with obvious nostalgia. It looks different, but it still feels like the same house. I have so many happy memories here. What brings you back to the neighborhood? She smiled a little nervously. Actually, I heard through the grapevine that you were living here again. My husband and I just moved back to town. He got a job at the university and we're looking for a house. We love this neighborhood and we were wondering. Well, this might sound presumptuous, but we were wondering if you might ever consider selling. I studied her face, seeing echoes of the sweet child who used to follow Ka around like a devoted puppy. Jenny had always been the kinder of the two. The one who included other kids when Ka wanted to exclude them. The one who shared her toys and never threw tantrums when she didn't get her way. Tell me about your family, I said instead of answering directly. Her face lit up. My husband David is a professor of environmental science. We have twin boys. They're 5 and we're hoping for more children. We want somewhere they can have a real backyard to play in, somewhere safe, where they can grow up the way we did. The way we did. She meant the way she and Kaya had grown up. Running between houses, playing in sprinklers, riding bikes up and down Maple Street until the streetlights came on. Would you like some tea? I offered. We spent the next hour talking. Jenny told me about her work as a pediatric nurse. Following in my footsteps, she said with a laugh. She talked about her boys, showing me photos on her phone, describing their personalities and their dreams of having a dog in a treehouse. She asked about Ka, carefully, probably having heard rumors about our estrangement. I gave her a neutral answer that we weren't in touch these days, and she didn't press for details. When she was getting ready to leave, she brought up the house again. I know it's a long shot, but if you ever do decide to sell, we'd love to be considered. We could offer fair market value, and we'd take good care of the place. We understand how much history is here. After she left, I sat in my living room thinking about her words. Fair market value, taking good care of the place. Understanding the history, everything Kaya and Derek had failed to do. That evening at Sarah and Bill's, I mentioned Jenny's visit. The Campbell girl. Sarah remembered her immediately. Such a sweet child. Nothing like some of the other kids in the neighborhood. She didn't mention Ka by name, but we all knew who she was thinking of. She wants to buy the house, I said. Bill raised an eyebrows. Are you thinking of selling? I don't know. Maybe. The truth was, I'd been thinking about it for weeks. The house was beautiful and I'd loved making it feel like home again. But it was also big and expensive to maintain. And I was 66 years old with no one to leave it to. More importantly, every room held memories of Ka, both good and painful. Sometimes I could forget the betrayal and remember the happy times, but other days, the weight of what we'd lost felt overwhelming. Maybe it was time for new memories to be made here. Maybe it was time for Jenny's boys to play in the backyard, where their mother and my daughter had once been friends. The next morning, I called Jenny. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, I said. If you're serious about wanting to buy the house, I might be interested in selling. The excitement in her voice was infectious. Really? Oh my goodness. Yes, we're absolutely serious. I have some conditions. Of course, anything. I smiled at her enthusiasm. First, I want to stay until spring. I'd like one more winter here. One more Christmas season. That's perfect. David's job doesn't start until June anyway. Second, I want to choose what happens to the house after I'm gone. If you decide to sell it someday, I want you to give me the option to buy it back or to designate who you sell it to. She agreed immediately, probably thinking it was an odd request, but understanding that the house meant something special to me. And third, I said I want to meet your boys. I want to make sure they'll be happy here. We arranged for her to bring her family over the next weekend. David turned out to be a gentle, thoughtful man who reminded me of my father. The boys, Michael and Matthew, were delightful, curious about everything polite, but not overly formal, full of the kind of energy that makes a house feel alive. As I watched them explore the backyard, pointing excitedly at the old oak tree where Kaya's tire swing had once hung, I knew I was making the right decision. We agreed on a price less than what the Hendersons had been willing to pay, but fair for a family sale. More importantly, I knew the house would be loved and cared for by people who understood its value wasn't just financial. The paperwork took a few weeks to complete. Jenny and David were patient with my requests to keep certain things: the established gardens, the built-in shelving I'd had, restored the window box planters where I grew herbs. On closing day, as I signed the final papers, Tom handed me a check for more money than I'd ever imagined having. Enough to buy a comfortable condo in one of the new senior communities that had been built near the university. Enough to travel if I wanted to, or to donate to causes I cared about, or simply to live comfortably without worrying about every expense. But more than the money, I had something I hadn't possessed in years: peace. I moved into my new condo on a sunny day in late March. It was smaller than the house, but it was easier to maintain, and it had a lovely view of the campus where David would be working. The community had activities and social opportunities, a pool and a garden where residents could grow their own vegetables. For the first time in my adult life, I was living entirely for myself. 6 months later, I was reading in my garden when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Is this Leona Patterson? The voice was familiar, but I couldn't place it immediately. Yes, this is Leona. This is Michael Henderson. My wife and I tried to buy your house last year. I remembered them. The young couple with 2 children who'd been caught up in Ka's fraudulent sale. Of course. How are you? We're well, thank you. We found a lovely house about 6 blocks from where you used to live. But I'm calling because my wife saw your daughter at the grocery store yesterday and she mentioned that you'd moved into Sunset Village. I was puzzled. I'm not sure I understand. Mrs. Patterson, your daughter, told my wife that you'd been forced to sell your house because of financial difficulties. She said you were having trouble adjusting to assisted living and that she was worried about your mental state. The familiar anger flared in my chest, but it was tempered now by something else. Amusement. Even in defeat, Ka was still trying to control the narrative, still trying to make herself look like the concerned daughter dealing with a difficult mother. Mr. Henderson. I appreciate you calling, but I can assure you that I sold my house by choice to a lovely family who will take wonderful care of it. I'm living independently in a beautiful condo, and I've never been happier or more mentally sharp. There was a pause. I thought that might be the case. My wife and I remembered how clear-headed and decisive you were when you called to explain about the sale. We just wanted to make sure you were all right. After we hung up, I sat in my garden for a long time thinking about Ka's latest fabrication. She was still out there, still spinning stories, still trying to justify what she'd done by painting me as incompetent or troubled. It didn't matter. The people who mattered, my new friends at the community center. My neighbors, the Hendersons, and others who'd witnessed what really happened knew the truth. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Jenny Morrison's number. Hi, Jenny. It's Leona. How are the boys settling in? Her voice was warm and happy. They love it here. Michael has already made friends with 3 kids on the street, and Matthew has claimed the oak tree as his personal climbing gym. David keeps talking about building them that treehouse we discussed. That's wonderful. And how are you doing? We're so grateful, Leona. This house has brought our family such joy. We think about you every day and hope you know what a gift you gave us. A gift. Not a transaction, not a business deal, but a gift. As the sun set over my new life, I realized that was exactly what it had been. A gift to a family who would treasure what I'd treasured, who would build new memories in the rooms where I'd built mine. And in choosing to give that gift, I'd received something even more valuable in return. The freedom to write my own ending on my own terms, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, rather than what I could provide. It had taken me 67 years to learn that sometimes the greatest act of love is learning when to let go. But now that I had learned it, I intended to spend the rest of my life practicing it every single day. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.